What will be Matt Painter's starting five in 2025?
You are Locked On Boilermakers, your daily podcast on the Purdue Boilermakers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Boilermakers here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your host, Nick Arvin. We're talking Boilermakers here today, specifically Boilermaker basketball. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. And I want to go ahead and thank all the everydayers who make Locked On Boilermakers so special. Thank you guys for making us your first listen every day. I'm going to go ahead and get right into things. We're talking basketball. Here in our first two segments, we're talking what is Matt Painter's starting five going to be this year for Purdue. We're going to have an appearance on Isaac Shoddy's Locked On College Basketball Show here in our second segment, and we're going to end the show off with some football. Week 0 action happened this weekend. Who were the winners, and why do people think that Barry Odom won week 0 when he didn't even play? We'll talk about all of that and more today. So let's go ahead and get right into things, talking about that starting five. There's been a lot of speculation about what the starting five is going to be for Purdue this year, and I kind of understand it from a perspective of, hey, you've got your big three. You've got Braden Smith, Fletcher Loyer, and of course TKR. So these are guys that obviously they have a starting spot. They're going to be starters. They've had that starting spot locked up since last season or before for some of those guys. Whether Matt Painter wants to say that that position is given, not earned rather, instead of given, all those guys knew that they're going to be the starters going into this year. So I'm not talking about those guys for once. We'll have all year to talk about Braden Smith, Fletcher Loyer, and TKR. I'm not talking about those guys right now. What I am talking about is that small forward spot and or shooting guard spot, whether Fletcher Loyer moves over to the 3, that's still to be seen. And then, of course, the center position, which is going to be so vitally important into what Matt Painter wants to do this year and to produce success ultimately. So when we think about that 5 spot, we think about Zach Edey. That's what comes to mind for me. We think about a traditional Purdue big who's able to be dominant in the front court. And last year we saw Daniel Jacobson goes down game 2, broken leg. So Purdue was already kind of short at that starting 5 spot. So TKR, he plugs in at the 5 and finds success, averages over 20 points a game, has a breakout season. Everybody knows the name Trey Kaufman-Renn after last year because he was so good. And what people don't talk about is the fact that Trey Kaufman-Renn is traditionally a power forward. He was guarding some of the biggest centers in the Big Ten, some of the biggest centers in the country, and he was finding success. He was still able to score the ball at a great production level, as we see when he averages 20 points a year. And when you think about that center position this year, it could go one of two ways. It could go Daniel Jacobson. He's healthy this year. He balled out last year, or over the summer, rather, at the U19 World Cup. We saw that he was a great rim protector, didn't get much action scoring the ball as a offensive playmaker, but he did show he showed some success as a defender, and that's going to be something that Purdue is going to utilize this year. Daniel Jacobson is going to get serious minutes, but I don't think he's the starter. And the reason why is because Purdue brings in a guy this year out of the transfer portal, South Dakota State, and his name is Oscar Cluff. And Oscar Cluff is going to be so very vital to what Purdue does this year because he's a big guy, 6'11", and not only is he 6'11", but he's extremely built. When he sets picks, nobody is getting around him. Oscar Cluff is going to be a menace this year for Purdue. I expect him to assume that starting 5 spot. I expect him to really be a force this year for Purdue. I expect him to ball out and create a great kind of pick and roll situation with Braden Smith. We talk about Braden Smith. We talk about what he is as a playmaker, but what we don't talk about is Oscar Cluff and his ability to set up the pick and roll. I think that Oscar Cluff has shown over summer throughout these practices that have been happening that he is so good As a playmaker, he's so good in the pick and roll, and that's exactly what Purdue needs out of a center this year. So he's going to be the starting center. So that gives us Braden Smith at the 1, Fletcher Loyer at the 2 or 3, and TKR at the 4, Oscar Cluff at the 5. But like I said, Fletcher Loyer, he's either going to play the 2 spot or the 3 spot. So who plugs in? Who plugs in either at the 2 or the 3? Who's going to be that starter in Matt Painter's starting 5 this year? And I think there's 3 real good candidates. And I'm going to start with, of course, Omier Meyer. Omier Meyer, we talked about him all the time in the show. We dedicated a full episode to the guy because that's how good he is. He balled out in FIBA just like Jacobson did, but even more so, banging down 3, scored 33 in a game against Cameroon on 7 assists and 5 rebounds. Omier Meyer has been making his name known. And while I think that he's one of the best offensive guards in the nation, and 18, he's one of the best offensive guards in the nation, but I don't think he's going to be a starter. And let me tell you why. I expect Omier Meyer to come off the bench, and I expect him to be fireworks off the bench. I expect him to be a spark plug that can bang down 3 or 4 threes in a row and really expand leads for Purdue. What kind of luxury is it to have a guy like Meyer, a lottery pick next year, coming off your bench? And so that brings us down to 2 guys, CJ Cox, Gicarri Harris. So when we think about CJ Cox, or when we think about Gicarri Harris, we think about 2 great defenders. These are 2 guys that are going to be great point of attack defenders. They're going to keep guards off the 3-point line, but not only that, they're also going to be able to stop drives from guards. We've seen Braden Smith do this all the time. He drives to the hoop, and whenever the defense collapses, that creates opportunities for him to pass it outside the perimeter and bang down threes. When you plug in a guy like Gicarri Harris or CJ Cox, they're both great at it. They stop that. They stop that dead in their tracks. They're able to be one-on-one with the guard, be able to find success, and pardon my pun, but be great guards, great at guarding. They're so good defensively. And for a team this year that's going to be so electric offensively, those are the 2 guys that I think really deserve to be in the starting lineup because they bring you something that, although Braden Smith and Fletcher Loyer are going to be the best backcourt in the nation, you don't necessarily think of them as a primary defender. You think about what they can do offensively. And when you pair up a Gicarri Harris, when you pair up a CJ Cox with those 2 guys, it creates the perfect opportunity to bring out a perfectly balanced starting lineup. So here's my take. I think that if you move Fletcher Loyer over to the 3, that creates the perfect opportunity for CJ Cox to step in, be the playmaker that he is, be alongside Braden Smith, and that to be a perfect tandem in your backcourt for those 2 guys to really excel. I think that CJ Cox will play so good next to Braden Smith at the 2 spot. But what if Fletcher Loyer stays at the 2? Well, if Matt Painter elects, hey, I want Fletcher Loyer at the shooting guard, I like the look that that gives us, I think that Gicarri Harris will be the starter. He's got he's a bigger build than what CJ Cox has. He's a little bit better of a defender when you just think about, hey, you have to guard a forward at that 3 spot. You're going to have to guard a lanky, long forward that the Big Ten has to offer. And I think that Gicarri Harris is the better option when thinking about guarding small forwards. He's the bigger build, like I said, is a better point of attack defender when you're just talking about a guy that's going to be able to hang on to a lengthy forward. I think that CJ Cox's defense can't be understated, but Gicarri Harris gives you a very interesting look at the small forward position. And we saw he's been improving his 3-point shot. That's something that he'll be utilized for this year. Obviously, last year wasn't the best shooter on the team, but he's been trying to grow this year throughout practices, and we've seen some consistency with that 3-point shot. So I expect Gicarri Harris to plug in at the 3. I expect CJ Cox to plug in at the 2, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the only lineup that Purdue runs this year. You could plug those guys in and out. Shoot, you can even put Meyer in for one of these, but I expect Gicarri Harris. I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'm not going to give you 2 answers, CJ Cox or Gicarri Harris. I think that Gicarri Harris is more ready for the moment right now. I think he's more experienced, ready to play these meaningful games. I think that he's a better look for you to pair alongside Fletcher Loyer. I think that he provides just a little bit better defense because he's got the wider frame. I think that Gicarri Harris is the guy, and that gives us a starting lineup of, at the 1, Braden Smith, at the 2, Fletcher Loyer, at the 3, Gicarri Harris, at the 4, TKR, and at the 5, Oscar Cluff. That's a lineup that is dominant. That's a lineup that's going to run through the Big Ten and run through all the way till March. I expect that team to really show up and show out this year. And that's going to be something we'll talk about here on our next segment as I joined college basketball on Locked On College Basketball's own Isaac Shoddy. And we'll have that segment here for you next. If you're trying to stay on top of your routine, whether that's workouts, long days on campus, or staying focused through back-to-back classes, hydration is where it all starts. And that's where Drip Drop comes in. Drip Drop is doctor-developed and scientifically proven for fast hydration. It uses the perfect balance of sodium electrolytes and glucose to help your body absorb fluids quickly, delivering 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of a leading sports drink. My go-to flavor is that grape flavor. It always gets me refreshed and ready for my day. And right now, you can get it too because Drip Drop is offering Locked On listeners 20% off your first order. Just head on over to dripdrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege. That's dripdrop.com. Promo code LOCKEDONCollege for 20% off. Stock up now before the heat hits hard.
Joining me to help discuss the Boilermakers is our brand new host of Locked On Boilermakers, Mr. Nick. Arvin, Nick, it's great to have you, brother. Welcome to the network. So glad you're here.
Thank you, Isaac. I'm super excited to be on the show. Thank you for having me. I'm hyped to talk all our Boilermakers. We got football season coming up this next week, but as you know, Purdue is a basketball school. We have big, exciting things coming this year for the Boilermakers, so I'm excited to talk about it today.
Heck yeah, man. It's so good to have you in. Congrats on the job. We're glad you're here. We're going to talk storylines. We're going to talk the returning 3-headed monster. Is this the team that gets Matt Painter that long-awaited natty? We're going to talk personnel, including starting 5, maybe breakout candidates. We'll take a look at the non-con as well as make record and postseason predictions, plus a floor and ceiling for Purdue. Going to be a great show. Nick, last season, the Boilermakers 24-12, 13-7 in Big Ten play coming off of that national runner-up season. They lost, oddly, 5 of the final 7 in the regular season after starting Big Ten play 11-2, finished tied for 4th in the Big Ten, lost in the Big Ten quarterfinals to Michigan, and then lost in the Sweet 16 to eventual national runner-up, the Houston Cougars, by just 2 points. Man, that was a great, great game there in the NCAA tournament. And Nick, here's where I want to start with this thing. There is only one returning consensus first-team All-American in all of college basketball, and he's a Purdue Boilermaker. His name's Braden Smith. What do people need to know about this dude if they've somehow been sleeping under a rock and missing on him?
Okay, Isaac. So Rick Pitino actually put out just about a week ago that the point guard position is dead in college basketball.
What is he doing?
Right. And I say, look at Braden Smith and tell me that's accurate because Braden Smith is on pace to beat out Hurley for the all-time assist leading record in the NCAA. Last year, he averaged 8.7 assists. If he's healthy, can play all throughout the year, make it deep in the postseason. He needs to average about 8 assists a game. And then he's the all-time leading assist record leader in the NCAA. He'll definitely get the Big Ten record. Early in the season, the holder of that is Cassius Winston over at Michigan State from a few years back. But a lot to be excited about for Braden Smith for Braden Smith's year this year. He had a great year last year. You bring in a couple guys via the portal. You bring in a couple new recruits, a couple guys for Braden Smith to facilitate to. And that really is where Braden Smith is the best. He has a great shot. He's able to get it done anywhere on the court from a scoring perspective. But when you think about the playmaking ability that he brings to this Purdue team, that's why they're the preseason favorite. That's why they're going to be so good. And there's a reason why Braden Smith is the National Player of the Year favorite. And we'll talk about that more here later. But when you think about who Braden Smith is, what he is, he's Purdue to a fault. He's the perfect Matt Painter guard. And it's the reason why Purdue is going to be so dang good this year.
I love it. It's funny. Literally 2 days ago on Monday's show, Andy and I did our St. John's preview, and we talked about that Pitino quote, and I used Braden Smith as an example of, what are you talking about, Coach Pitino? So I love that you had no idea about that, and you brought it full circle. Thank you, Mr. Nick. You know what you're doing. Now, what's so fun to me is I remember 3 years ago, in come these unheralded freshman backcourt mates of Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer, and it was like, I don't, who are these dudes coming out of nowhere, unheralded? And I know COVID had a lot to do with the weird ranking. But Nick, as somebody that's followed this team for so long, what has the journey of the career of these two young men been like? And is it weird for you to recognize that the culmination, is it like Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer are seniors in college? That blows my mind.
It is insane when you think about when Fletcher Lawyer, when Braden Smith come into Purdue, that team was primarily a Zach Edey-led team. When you think about what Purdue was, you thought Zach Edey at that time. So a guy like Fletcher Lawyer, a guy like Braden Smith didn't necessarily get the notoriety that they deserved because Zach Edey was the face of that team. Right. And there's nothing wrong with that. Zach Edey was a great player at Purdue. But when you think about what this team was last year without Zach Edey, those guys really made a name for themselves as the face of this program, as the face of what Matt Painter wants to do. So we see kind of a breakout season for both those guys last year, especially Braden Smith, whose stats so much better from a production standpoint, had a good year his freshman and sophomore year, but last year really broke out. But when you think about those two guys, when you think about who they are, what they're going to be going into this senior year, I think about two guys that play ball hard. Those are two guys that you don't have to get them to work. You don't have to motivate them. There's nothing that you can do to persuade those two guys to not give it their all every single game, every single practice. And that's what's made them so good at Purdue. That's what's made them so good just being guards in basketball. They're two of the best guards in basketball. And when we look at it at the end of this year, I think that there's a good chance that we can say these two guards made up the best backcourt in Purdue history.
Ooh, Nick, I like that take, man. And I have not stopped to even begin to think about that or research that or process that. But my gut reaction is there's got to be legitimacy to that, man. I love that point. Now, what's crazy is we talk about Fletcher Lawyer, who had 13.8 a game last year, Braden Smith, 15.8. And while there's all this understandable and legitimate Braden Smith love as preseason National Player of the Year front runner, we have yet to even discuss another guy who was an All-American honorable mention last year, who was just one, Nick, of 20 players in the entire country, all 360 plus teams in Division I, to score 20 or more points a game. And that's our guy, TKR, Trey Kaufman-Renn. Are we sleeping on the impact that this dude is going to have because of all the Braden Smith love?
So we are absolutely sleeping on TKR, and let me tell you why. So we see he averaged 20.1 points a game last year, but that 20 points is honestly, it doesn't even show what his value was last year. That's because when you think about Purdue, they were a little bit short in the front court. They didn't have a high quality center like we saw in Zach Edey. Daniel Jacobson, the center, 7'4" guy, breaks his leg like 2 games into the year. So Purdue was struggling looking for depth at that center spot last year, and TKR had to plug into the center spot. He was able to average 20 points as a center when he's used to playing that 4 spot against high quality bigs in the Big Ten. And when you think about the additions that Purdue brings in this year, whether that's an Oscar Cluff coming in from South Dakota State, a big center, or even just Daniel Jacobson getting healthy again this year, you have the availability to move TKR over to the 4, somewhere where he's not necessarily more familiar with, but I feel like his skill set is better tuned for the 4 spot. And I think that we'll see a big jump in production for him this year. And that's insane to say when this is a guy that averaged 20 points last year. He was one of the best bigs in college basketball, and we haven't even scraped the surface of what TKR can be. So I'm all for the Braden Smith hype. I think that Braden Smith has the perfect opportunity to have the year of his life, to have a career year in his senior year at Purdue, but don't sleep on TKR. Since 2018, the National Player of the Year award has only gone exclusively to big men, whether that be at the 4 spot, the 5 spot. We haven't seen a guard win it since Jalen Brunson at Villanova in 2018. So we see what the voters like. We see kind of what the blueprint is for an award winner. And when you think about that blueprint, TKR fits it to a key. He's the perfect guy for that award. I'm not saying count Braden Smith out.
Sure.
He's a dog, but TKR needs more recognition.
And hopefully they won't split votes. I always hate that for teammates when
Yeah.
it's like people are divided on that. It's like, what's making Purdue cook? Is it TKR? Is it Braden? So hopefully that doesn't happen. Now, Nick, before we move on to more big picture personnel conversations, I want to zoom out. And yes, we will make postseason predictions later on in the show. But I don't know about you. For me, I wondered if in the post Zach Edey era, like had the window closed for this Purdue championship moment, right? Like missing out on beating UConn in the national championship game, like was that the end of the opportunity? And it was a solid but unremarkable last year, I think is probably fair to say. But man, it really seems like this season is a return right back to the top. So here's my question to you, Nick. Is this Purdue team the one that not only gets Matt Painter his much-deserved, well-deserved national championship? It's not a matter of if, but when to me, but also helps break the 2.5-decade-old Big Ten title drought. Is that going to happen this year, Nick?
This is the team, Isaac. And I've been talking about it on my show, and I have gotten a little bit of hate for saying this, but if not now, then when? This is the best team that Matt Painter has ever had going into the season. Just from a pure talent perspective, it's the most complete team that he's ever had. I'm not saying that Matt Painter isn't an amazing coach, because he is. He's proven it year after year after year as a talent developer, as a recruiter, as a motivator. He's one of the best head coaches in the nation. And the only thing that he needs to boost that resume is that national championship. And as soon as he wins that, he goes up with a Pitino. He goes up with a Danny Hurley. He's in those conversations because he has the national championship to back up the success that he's had at Purdue. I think that this year he gets it done. I think this is the team. I think this roster is perfectly complete. It's a perfect team that when you bring it to March, it has the depth to fight through all those games. It has the potential to kind of run any team out of the building. When you talk about the pure offense that this team's going to bring with a Braden Smith, Fletcher, Lawyer, TKR combination, this team is the team that gets Purdue over the hump, and this is the team that gets Purdue their first national championship. Have you decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. You know you're going to need that money for food and drinks, what they're charging these days. Well, Game Time makes it possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Say you want to make it out to Ross Aid this fall, week 1, Ball State, USC coming up week 3. That'll be a big one. Say you want to make it out to Mackey this winter. Well, you can do that with Game Time. If you just take the guesswork out of buying tickets, you can do that with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Huge thank you to Isaac Shoddy for having me on his show. Very exciting. Does a great job over on Locked On College Basketball, but also on his own show, Locked On UNC. So make sure to check him out. Check out Locked On UNC. Check out Locked On College Basketball. But for this last segment, I want to shift over from basketball a little bit because we had some football for the first time since last year, since 2024. We saw UNLV play football. And the reason I bring UNLV up, obviously there were better games to watch than UNLV taking on an FCS opponent in Idaho State. Farmageddon, that was a great ball game. But the reason I bring up UNLV is because Barry Odom was at UNLV last year. He was at UNLV the year before, and he turned UNLV into a powerhouse. First time the UNLV had been to back-to-back bowls, got them to their best record in school history with 10 wins last year. So we saw what Barry Odom did at UNLV, and that was enticing to Purdue. That was enticing to AD and Mike Boboski at Purdue for why they were going to hire Barry Odom following, Brian Walters last year. Barry Odom has a reputation for building up programs, and he did that at UNLV. When you think about the spot that Purdue was in last year, when you have the opportunity to bring in a guy like Barry Odom that transformed UNLV from a similar spot, albeit in the Mountain West, not the Big Ten, but he transformed that program from being the bottom of that conference to being a front runner, to dueling with Boise State and Ashton Genty last year. That's the type of guy that you want in your program. And there's been a lot of conversations about, hey, he did this in the Mountain West. I don't know if he can do it in the Big Ten. While to a certain extent, I understand where that's coming from, you have to look at the success that he's had. He found success at times in the SEC at Missouri. That's a big conference. You say he can't be successful in the Big Ten. He was successful in the SEC. That last year wasn't great, but the other 2 years, he turned that program around. That program was in a bad spot. When you think about UNLV, that program was in a bad spot, and he turned it around. So he goes to Purdue, and then UNLV gets a big time hire. And Dan Mullen, we saw him at Florida, takes a few years off, and then decides UNLV is the job for him. So big matchup for Dan Mullen to kind of show what this UNLV team is, to prove that, hey, I don't think he was thinking this, but for some people out there, it was to prove that Barry Odom wasn't the success in UNLV, that UNLV can find success outside of Barry Odom, and that any coach could find success that he did at UNLV. And so week 0, Idaho State comes to town, and obviously not the highest quality opponent. I think the spread on that game was 30.5 in favor of UNLV. So UNLV was expected to win by over 4 touchdowns. And guess what happened? UNLV almost got beat by FCS opponent Idaho State. And that's not even taking it lightly. They were in a huge battle, just barely pulled that game out, 38-31. But this is a huge win for Barry Odom. And I'm not trying to stir up controversy. I'm not trying to stir up Dan Mullen can't do his job. But what I am saying is that UNLV went from a program that under even before Barry Odom, we talked about it, that program was terrible. UNLV has never been good at football. And I'm not trying to slander UNLV, but that's just the facts. UNLV has been a basketball school. They've never been good at football. Barry Odom comes, changes the narrative around UNLV. Like, people actually care about UNLV football when Barry Odom's there. He leaves, goes to Purdue, week 1 matchup, Idaho State, 30-point favorites, and you barely win. This is Dan Mullen. Great head coach. He brought that Florida team dang near competing with Alabama. He didn't do a bad job at Florida. I liked what Dan Mullen did a lot of the time at Florida. Whether you don't, it doesn't matter. He found success, and he has another job. He has a job at UNLV, but I don't know. It didn't seem to play out real well for him. They barely beat, I hate to keep repeating this, but the fact that UNLV barely beat Idaho State needs to be talked about. It needs to be talked about what Barry Odom did for that UNLV program. And hey, you may say Iowa State was the biggest winner of week 0. Obviously, UNLV wasn't the biggest winner of week 0. Shoot, I'd say that Idaho State, for competing with that team, is a bigger winner than UNLV. But I come to say Barry Odom is the biggest winner of week 0 because he showed everybody that what happened at UNLV wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for him. So we'll see this coming week, this Saturday. Barry Odom's going to catch that W against Ball State, but he's already catching W's, and his Boilermakers haven't even stepped on the field yet. So we'll cover Ball State for you guys. Coming up this week, we'll have a lot of coverage covering that week 1 matchup. That's exciting. Great job to all the teams that won out week 0, except for you, UNLV. That's all I got for you today, guys. Thank y'all for joining us once again on this Monday morning on Locked On Boilermakers. Thank y'all for making Locked On Boilermakers your first listen today. For your second listen, check out The Portal Show with Braden Smith. Brian has the latest rumors, portal entries, and signings. Be the most informed fan on the rapid changes to the college football landscape. Find The Portal on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you, guys. And as always, boulder up, hammer down.